There's a reason you clicked on this. Some part of you read that title and thought, wait, could that be me? And honestly, there's a good chance it is. By the time you finish reading this, you're going to look at certain things about yourself. Habits you've always considered problems, quirks you've tried to hide, signs you interpreted as your brain not working quite right, and you're going to see them completely differently. Because psychology and neuroscience have been quietly building a detailed picture of what high intelligence actually looks like in everyday behavior. And it doesn't look anything like what movies and TV told us it would. For years, I thought I was mentally disorganized. I couldn't turn my brain off at night. I'd catch myself talking out loud to no one. I'd spend 20 minutes making a decision that should have taken 20 seconds. Nobody around me seemed to struggle with these things the way I did. I figured something was slightly off. Then I went deep into the research, and what I found changed the way I understood myself. One of these 15 signs is something that almost every high IQ person does, but most people mistake it for anxiety, weakness, or mental instability. When you get to it, a lot of things about yourself will start making sense. Before we begin, one honest note, because without it, this will feel like flattery dressed up as psychology. High IQ is not the same as wisdom, not the same as success, emotional intelligence, or being a good person. What it is a specific cognitive profile, a way the brain processes information, handles complexity, and engages with the world. That profile has very real, very specific behavioral fingerprint. Some of them are genuine advantages. Some of them are genuinely hard to live with. That's what we're mapping here. 15 signs, moving from the most visible to the most surprising, and the most misunderstood. 15. You ask why more than most people. This probably started in childhood, and it annoyed the adults around you. People with high IQ don't just accept how things are. They want to understand the mechanism behind them. Why does this rule exist? Why do we do it this way? Why does this actually work? It's not contrarianism. It's not about being difficult. It's a genuine cognitive drive toward understanding systems rather than just operating within them. Research in cognitive psychology consistently shows that high IQ individuals have what's called a higher need for cognition, an intrinsic motivation to think deeply, not just to solve problems, but because thinking itself feels satisfying in a way that's hard to explain to people who don't experience it. Low need for cognition isn't laziness. It's a different cognitive style. But if you've always been the person who couldn't accept that's just how it is as a real answer, that's not a personality flaw. That's your brain demanding the kind of understanding it was built for. 14. You have a wider range of interests than most people. Most people have a few things they care about. People with high intelligence tend to have many, and not superficially. They'll go deep into history, then get absorbed in a science topic, then spend 3 weeks reading behavioral economics, then become genuinely fascinated by architecture. They're not doing this to seem interesting. They genuinely can't help it. The psychological mechanism is the same one behind the curiosity we just discussed, but applied across domains. High fluid intelligence, the type most closely associated with IQ, allows the brain to find patterns and connections across very different fields. So a highly intelligent person doesn't just find one domain interesting. They find the connecting tissue between domains interesting. They notice how a concept in evolutionary biology explains something about economics. They see how a principle from music theory shows up in mathematics. This cross-domain thinking isn't random. It's a direct expression of how their brain processes information. 13. You're comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. This one separates people quickly. The human brain, as a general rule, hates not knowing. Uncertainty feels threatening. So most people resolve it as fast as possible. Pick an answer, commit to a side, stop thinking about it. People with high IQ tend to do something different. They're more comfortable sitting with open questions. They can hold two conflicting ideas in mind simultaneously without immediately needing to choose one. Psychologists call this tolerance for ambiguity, and it correlates positively with cognitive ability. It's not that highly intelligent people are indifferent to answers. They want answers intensely, but they'd rather keep a question open than close it with a wrong one. They've internalized that complexity is real, and that forcing simple answers onto complex questions is precisely how people end up confidently wrong. If you've ever frustrated someone in an argument by saying, "Well, it depends," or "I think it's more complicated than that," you know exactly what this feels like. 12. You are hard on yourself about your mistakes. People with high IQ are often their own harshest critic. When they make a mistake, they don't just notice it and move on. They analyze it, revisit it, sometimes obsess over it long after anyone else would have let it go. From the outside, this looks like excessive self-criticism or low self-esteem. But the cognitive mechanism is different. High IQ individuals tend to have a more accurate picture of their own capabilities. Research on the Dunning-Kruger effect documents the tendency for people with limited knowledge to overestimate their own competence. The inverse is also well documented. More competent people often underestimate themselves relative to others. They know enough to know what they don't know. They can see the gap between where they are and where they could be. That gap is uncomfortable. That discomfort drives improvement. But it also creates a persistent inner critic that never fully shuts up. 11. You find small talk exhausting or pointless. This one gets misread constantly. People assume that someone who dislikes small talk is antisocial, arrogant, or socially awkward. But research tells a different story. Studies have found that highly intelligent people report more satisfaction from substantive conversations than from surface-level social exchanges. It's not that they hate people. It's that they experience genuine frustration when conversation stays in shallow water indefinitely. A high IQ brain is a pattern-seeking, meaning-making machine. Small talk, by design, doesn't activate any of those deeper processes. It's the cognitive equivalent of only ever eating plain crackers when your appetite is demanding an actual meal. These individuals can do small talk. Most have learned to. But they often feel slightly drained afterward in a way that a real conversation about ideas, problems, or genuine human experience simply doesn't produce. 10. You use humor to process difficult or complex ideas. There's a consistent body of research connecting high intelligence with a particular type of humor, specifically, humor that relies on unexpected connections, subverted expectations, and layered meaning. Abstract humor, dark humor, absurdist humor, and especially verbal wit all appear more frequently in people with higher cognitive ability. A 2017 study found that comedians scored significantly higher on both verbal and abstract reasoning tests compared to control group. The mechanism makes sense. Humor, at its core, is about holding two incompatible frames in mind simultaneously and collapsing them suddenly. That's a cognitively demanding task. It requires fast processing, broad knowledge, and the ability to jump between conceptual categories in a fraction of a second. If you've always used humor to cope with hard things or to make dense topics bearable, your brain was doing something more sophisticated than it probably got credit for. 9. You're slower to make decisions than people expect. Here's one that most people get completely wrong. There's a widespread assumption that smart people make fast decisions. And in domains they know well, high IQ individuals do process information very quickly. But in novel situations, or situations with genuine complexity, they often slow down significantly, and that slowdown frustrates the people around them. The reason is simple. A more intelligent person can see more variables. They can identify more potential consequences, more edge cases, more ways a decision could go wrong. The average person making a choice might be weighing 3 factors. A high IQ person making the same choice might be unconsciously weighing 15. That additional cognitive load takes time. If you've ever been called indecisive or told you overthink things, consider that what looks like inability to decide might actually be a mind doing far more analysis than the people watching can perceive. 8. You have strong opinions, but change them when the evidence demands it. This is a rare combination. Changing your mind is seen, socially, as weakness, as inconsistency, as not knowing what you believe. So most people dig in. Once a position is stated publicly, it gets defended even when new information should update it. High IQ individuals are more likely to do something different, form strong opinions with clear reasoning, and then actually revise those opinions when better information arrives. Psychologists call this intellectual humility, and it correlates positively with cognitive ability. It doesn't mean these people have no convictions. They can be intensely convicted, but their loyalty is to the best available understanding, not to the position they happened to hold last week. If someone has genuinely convinced you to change your mind more than once in your life, not through pressure but because their argument was actually better, that's not weakness. That's rational thought working the way it's supposed to work. 7. You prefer to work through problems alone before discussing them. This gets labeled as aloofness or poor teamwork, but it's actually a specific cognitive preference that shows up consistently in high IQ populations. Before bringing a problem to someone else, they want to have worked through it independently first. They want to understand it from their own angle, exhaust their own approaches, and arrive at the conversation with real substance, rather than a vague, half-formed question they haven't yet attempted to answer themselves. Research on solitude and intellectual performance suggests that highly intelligent individuals often do their best thinking alone, not because they're antisocial, but because social interaction, even well-intentioned, introduces cognitive noise. Other people's framings, assumptions, and energy can interrupt the kind of deep focus that produces genuine insight. If you've ever felt a flash of resentment when someone interrupted your thinking process to offer help you didn't ask for, even help you eventually needed, this is probably why. 6. You talk to yourself, out loud or internally. This is the one I mentioned at the beginning. For a long time, I genuinely thought it meant something was wrong with me. You're walking through a store muttering through a list. You're working on a problem and narrating your own reasoning. You're having an argument in the shower with someone who isn't there. Research by psychologist Gary Lupien and others has shown that self-directed speech, talking to yourself, actually enhances cognitive performance. It helps organize thought, maintain focus, and work through complex problems more effectively. For highly intelligent people, who are often processing more information simultaneously than average, self-talk becomes a tool for managing cognitive load. It's essentially externalizing the internal architecture, taking what's happening inside the mind and giving it structure through language. If you've been embarrassed about talking to yourself, the science says you can stop being embarrassed. 5. You have a low tolerance for intellectual dishonesty. This one can make high IQ people genuinely difficult to be around, and most of them know it. When someone uses a bad argument, misrepresents facts, or reasons sloppily, a highly intelligent person feels something that goes beyond mild disagreement. There's an almost visceral reaction to logical inconsistency, to motivated reasoning, to the kind of argument that sounds persuasive but doesn't actually hold up under examination. The reason is that high IQ individuals have spent significant cognitive energy understanding how arguments work. They know the difference between correlation and causation. They can identify when a statistic is being used misleadingly. They notice when someone shifts the goalposts mid-conversation. And when that happens in front of them, they can't just let it pass the way someone less attuned to logical structure might. This creates friction. People don't enjoy being fact-checked in real time. But the alternative, going along with reasoning you know is wrong, feels genuinely intolerable if your brain is built this way. 4. You catastrophize, but productively. Here's a distinction that doesn't get made nearly enough. Catastrophizing, imagining worst-case scenarios, is typically framed as an anxiety disorder, a cognitive distortion, something to be corrected in therapy. And in its pathological form, it absolutely can be. But research has found that a specific type of catastrophizing that highly intelligent people engage in is actually functional. Psychologists call it defensive pessimism. Defensive pessimism is the practice of imagining everything that could go wrong, in detail, and then preparing for those scenarios. It reduces anxiety for some people by giving them a sense of control, and it produces genuinely better outcomes because the problems that were anticipated can be addressed before they happen. Studies have found that people who use defensive pessimism as a strategy actually perform better on complex tasks than optimists who don't engage in this kind of premortem thinking. So if your brain automatically generates a list of ways something could fail before you even begin, that's not pure anxiety. That's a risk assessment system that probably serves you more than you realize. 3. You feel like an outsider, even when you belong. This is one of the most quietly painful entries on this list, and one of the most documented. People with significantly above-average intelligence frequently report a persistent sense of not quite fitting in, even in groups where they are genuinely welcomed and respected. It's not paranoia. It's not imposter syndrome in the clinical sense. It's a perception difference grounded in something real. When you think differently from most people around you, when your humor lands differently, when you care about things others find obscure, when conversations keep stopping before they reach the depth you find satisfying, you notice it. Repeatedly. Even in communities built around shared interests, a high IQ person often finds they see one layer deeper than the group norm. And that extra layer creates distance. This isn't about superiority. It's about a genuine cognitive mismatch that accumulates into a feeling of social foreignness that almost every highly intelligent person recognizes immediately when they hear it described. 2. You're a night owl, and it's not just a habit. Multiple studies have found a statistically significant correlation between higher IQ and a preference for staying up late. Research from the London School of Economics suggested that more intelligent individuals are more likely to have a nocturnal sleep pattern, going to sleep later, waking up later, and doing their best cognitive work in the evening or night hours. This isn't purely cultural. It appears to have a neurological basis. Humans are biologically diurnal. We evolved to be awake during the day. Shifting away from that default requires a level of cognitive flexibility and willingness to override biological programming that correlates with higher general intelligence. There's also a practical dimension. Nighttime is quieter. There are fewer interruptions. The cognitive environment is cleaner. For a brain that processes deeply and needs sustained focus, the night is simply a better workspace. If the world's 9-to-5 structure has always felt slightly wrong to you, you're not lazy. You may just be built for a different schedule than the world designed its infrastructure around. 1. You worry more than almost anyone you know. This is the one. This is the sign that most people would never, in a million years, associate with high intelligence. And it's the one with some of the most compelling and counterintuitive research behind it. A study published in the journal Personality and Individual Differences found a significant positive correlation between verbal intelligence and the tendency to worry. People who scored higher on verbal IQ reported higher levels of daily worry. A separate line of research from SUNY Downstate Medical Center found that individuals with high IQ and anxiety had higher levels of a brain chemical associated with alertness and attention regulation, suggesting that worry in these individuals may be a byproduct of a nervous system that is genuinely running more background processes than average. Think about what worry actually is mechanically. Worry is the brain modeling future scenarios, projecting forward in time, simulating outcomes, identifying threats before they materialize. That requires imagination. It requires the ability to hold hypothetical realities in mind with clarity. It requires running multiple scenarios in parallel and comparing them. Those are all cognitively demanding tasks. And they're tasks that a high IQ brain performs more automatically, more frequently, and in more detail than average. This doesn't mean worry is good. Chronic, unmanaged anxiety is genuinely harmful, and the research doesn't suggest otherwise. What it suggests is that the capacity for worry and the capacity for sophisticated forward-thinking cognition share the same neurological infrastructure. You can't fully have one without significant overlap with the other. So if your brain won't stop running what-if scenarios, if you've been called anxious, told you worry too much, looked at with confusion by people who genuinely cannot understand why you're still thinking about something that hasn't happened yet, consider that what you're experiencing might be a feature of a very active mind, not a flaw in your character. What this actually means, and what it doesn't. I want to be honest with you about something, because this list could easily be misread. None of these signs, on their own, proves anything about your IQ. Correlation is not causation, and a list like this is not a diagnostic tool. You might recognize most of these in yourself and score average on a standardized test. You might score in the top 1% and not recognize half of them. Intelligence is not a single thing. It's a cluster of different cognitive abilities that interact in complex ways. What this list is actually useful for is something different. It's a reframe. Because most of the things on this list are things that people with active, complex minds have been told, at various points in their lives, are problems. You think too much. You worry too much. You can't make a simple decision. You talk to yourself. You stay up too late. You make everything complicated. You're too sensitive when people are being logically inconsistent. And the reframe is this: many of the traits that feel like liabilities, that you've maybe spent years trying to correct, manage, or apologize for, have a documented cognitive profile attached to them. They're not random. They're not arbitrary failures. They're connected to a particular kind of mind that processes the world in a particular kind of way. Understanding that doesn't remove the friction those traits create, but it changes what you do with them. Instead of working against them, you can start working with them. The shadow side, what to watch for. Because I want to be balanced about this. There's a shadow side to every one of these traits. High tolerance for ambiguity becomes avoidance if it turns into a permanent excuse not to commit to decisions. Dislike of small talk becomes social isolation if it's never moderated. The tendency to see more variables becomes paralysis if there's no system for eventually cutting through the complexity and acting. Worry becomes genuinely destructive anxiety if there's no outlet or framework for it. The self-directed criticism that comes from knowing your own gaps becomes a constant inner monologue of inadequacy if it's never balanced with honest recognition of what you actually know. The goal isn't to identify these traits and use them as explanations for everything. The goal is to understand them accurately enough to channel them deliberately. A restless, questioning mind that understands itself is far more effective, and far less exhausting to inhabit, than one that spends its energy being confused about why it works the way it does. Which one of these 15 hit closest to home for you? The worry, the outsider feeling, the night owl schedule, the catastrophizing that actually helps you prepare. Whatever it was, you're not broken. You're just built differently. And now you know what that actually looks like.